On today's show, we've got a crossover edition episode as we preview the Rockets matchup with the Minnesota Timberwolves, their third NBA Cup group play game. Can the Rockets clinch this game and advance to the knockout round? What to expect out of the Minnesota Timberwolves and so much more. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. Just do a drive-by, say Go Rockets, and also be sure to subscribe to our new daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. There is a QR code. If you're watching on YouTube, it is right down there in the bottom right corner of your screen. Now, today's episode is sponsored by Built. Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Joining us now for another Locked On crossover edition episode, we've got Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. I'm Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets, and we're here to get you up to speed on everything going on with the Houston Rockets and the Minnesota Timberwolves ahead of this third Cup game for both teams. Rockets sitting at 2-0. Ben, where are the Wolves at right now?
Wolves are 1-1, and I think -7 point differential. They had a blowout loss in game one, but needless to say, it's a must win in terms of the Cup for the Wolves.
If there's anything that these two teams share, it's that they've both at one point or another this season had a disappointing loss to the Blazers, although that happened to the Rockets outside of Cup action, thankfully. So we're going to get into talking about Rockets. We'll talk about Wolves. We'll get into matchups and predictions and all that stuff. We're going to focus on the Wolves here in our first segment. We'll get to some Rocket stuff in the second segment, and then we'll look at matchups, to look at predictions, all that kind of stuff in our final segment of the show. So, Ben, where I want to start with you first is looking at this Wolves team, right? Sitting at 8-8 on the season, coming off, such a successful season last year, obviously had the big Karl-Anthony Towns trade this past offseason. Where is kind of the gauge of looking back at that trade and thinking, okay, was this a massive mistake? Is the team underperforming relative to expectations? How are things looking so far in Minnesota?
Well, the short answer is yes. They're definitely underperforming expectations. I mean, they went to the conference finals. They're sitting here at 8-8 now, 18% of the way through the season. So it's certainly been a disappointing start to the season. It hasn't necessarily been the exact same way that I necessarily would have expected. The offense has actually been really good. Last year, really good is maybe a little bit strong. Last year was a middle of the pack offense. This year, they've been a top 10 offense basically all season to this point. The biggest problem has been the defense. And, I think maybe 12 months ago, if I had told you, hey, the Wolves are going to trade Karl-Anthony Towns and their defense is going to get worse, I think a lot of people would have been really surprised by that. But that's been a legitimate part of it. Julius Randle's just has not been as good of a defender as Karl-Anthony Towns. And maybe the bigger issue is that the bench unit doesn't have Kyle Anderson anymore. And at least in terms of the defense. And so you don't have that additional kind of switchable, versatile forward that, as Chris Finch always called him, his Swiss Army knife, who could guard really 1 through 5 in a lot of cases. And that's just missing from this team. The idea was that they could potentially replace him with Joe Ingles. Well, that was before the trade where they got Dante DiVincenzo. And now DiVincenzo is part of the rotation, and he's a really good player. He's struggled to this point in a Wolves uniform, but you just don't have as much size off the bench. And even in the starting lineup, Julius Randle, there's certainly things he does better than Karl-Anthony Towns, but he isn't quite the switchable, impactful defender, believe it or not, that Cat was with the Wolves. And frankly, the effort level isn't always there defensively for Julius Randle either, where that was never a problem for Cat last season. So grand scheme of things, things certainly have not gone to plan through the first 16 games of the season. But I think there's still a lot of room for optimism because we are only 16 games in, and these pieces have only, that trade happened on the eve of training camp. And there's been good moments with Julius Randle, and Dante DiVincenzo is certainly better than he's played to this point. So now the trick, of course, is it's the Western Conference, and they're already pretty far behind the 8 ball. I think if the playoffs started today, they'd be like a half game out of the play-in. So there's, it's getting late early already, even though we're only at Thanksgiving week. But it's certainly been a challenging start to the season for this new look Wolves group.
What's been kind of, when you look at where this team is at success-wise so far, where's been kind of the weakest link so far of kind of the Wolves rotation players to this point?
I would say it's that they're only playing 8 guys. The rotation is only 8 players. And last year it was 9 consistently. And the 9th guy was at times shaky. I mean, it was, I guess, pun not intended, but we'll go with it. Shake Milton was the 9th guy early last season. They ended up trading him. Troy Brown Jr. was the 9th guy for a while. They ended up trading him. Jordan McLaughlin got minutes in that role, but they're only playing 8 guys consistently. And now I think Mike Conley's questionable for Tuesday night's game. It sounds like he's leaning toward not playing again on Tuesday, missing a 3rd straight game, which means Rob Dillingham, the rookie number 8 overall pick who they traded up for in this year's draft, he's probably the 8th guy in the rotation right now, but they're still only playing 8 guys. Chris Finch has not been able to trust a 9th guy in the rotation, whether that's, whether that would be Dillingham when they're fully healthy or Josh Minott, who's gotten a look a couple times. But I don't think there's maybe been one game this year through 16 where Chris Finch has played a 9th guy more than 10 minutes in a game. So he's keeping his rotation really tight. And obviously over the course of the season, that's going to be an issue from a workload management standpoint. But it's the team just overall, like you could argue that their top 3 bench players on paper are the best 3 bench players in the league. Naz Reid's the reigning 6th man of the year. Dante DiVincenzo averaged 16, 17 points a game last year at the Knicks. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker's awesome. One of the better perimeter defenders, certainly off the bench in the league. But beyond that top 8, there's a pretty big drop off, at least in terms of who Chris Finch trusts.
That was one of the things, I guess, most surprising to me about this Wolves team is I kind of thought, right, with the intention to move up in the draft to acquire Rob Dillingham, I really thought, okay, cool, he's going to be like a little bit of that spark off the bench, kind of they're going to let him have some run here, and he just hasn't had a chance to really break into the rotation so far to this point. Now, you talk about the size issue, right, just not having a ton of size across the board. Yes, DiVincenzo's a solid player when he's playing to his level of expectations, whatever. But, maybe that is another factor in there. Do you see a world where maybe Finch does start to either flesh out the rotation and let Rob get some more run as the season progresses?
I think so. And we're starting to see it. And sometimes, it's the whole necessity is the mother of invention thing where there's no other no other choice when Mike Conley's hurt. But before the DiVincenzo Randall trade, I think the plan was for Rob Dillingham to be that kind of spark plug off the bench. But when that trade happened, it was a 2-for-1. And it was like, all right, we got 2 rotation guys for the price of 1, or 2 guys backfilling 1 role. And now Dillingham, instead of being the 9th guy, Chris Finch was like, all right, well, we can ease him in a little bit. And there's certainly some, we don't know, like Dillingham, his best game of the season by far was last time out, the loss to the Celtics. He had, I think, 14 points in 10 minutes or something like that off the bench. And looked every bit the part of the player they thought they were drafting, that fans thought the Wolves were going to get. And we don't know if he had done that, if he was in the rotation on opening night, if he would have been there right away, or if having 6 weeks in the pros, shoot-arounds and practices and film study and sitting on the bench during games, if that's helped him get to a point where now he is going to be effective. But he looked really good against Boston. So I think Chris Finch is allowing for that possibility that Dillingham is working his way into the rotation, forcing his way into the rotation. I think it just would give them another element of explosiveness. Like outside of Anthony Edwards is the only other guy on the team that has the same same burst off the dribble. And I truly believe Dillingham he's obviously nowhere near the size or even the athlete, of course, of Anthony Edwards, but he has that same sort of burst and nobody else on the team does. And so when he's got the ball in his hands, you have to respect him off the dribble. There's all kinds of other things that he's going to have to catch up on. The defense has to improve. He's obviously a really small player, and so there's less margin for error defensively for him. But the upside offensively is huge for Rob Dillingham, and I think there's a chance he plays a pretty big role in this game against Houston, especially if Mike Conley doesn't play. Like we could see, 12, 15, 16 minutes off the bench for Dillingham, and I think he'll play well.
What's been at this point kind of, through this early part of the season, like you said, we're kind of, 15, 18%, whatever you want to look at, we're nearing the quarter way mark of the season. What's been kind of the most underreported, I think maybe storyline you think covering the Wolves that not a lot of people have been paying attention to or might not make national headlines, but has been relevant, to what's been going on with the Wolves so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it probably would be I don't know. I guess Mike Conley, there's been a lot of talk about the point guard play for the Wolves. I think this is, I guess I'll give you two kind of answer your question with, I guess, two answers. One would be on the negative side, Jaden McDaniels has not played very well this year. He's had a better, like last week, I think he's performed better. Their loss to their win going back to last Sunday, they had the buzzer beater win. Julius Randle hit the buzzer beater to beat the Suns. Starting then, he's played a little bit better the last couple of games, but defensively, I think he's been okay, but I don't think he's been as good as he was last year when he got second all defensive team honors. And offensively, he's been a clear net negative until recently. So hopefully that's starting to turn around, but that's a major problem if he's not who you need him to be. And if he's a negative offensively, that's really challenging. I think on the plus side, I think this has been talked about a little bit, but excuse me, it's hard to underscore enough just how good Anthony Edwards has been from the perimeter in this season. I believe he's still leading the league in 3-pointers made. At least he was through play on Sunday. But he's shooting now more than half. 53% of his shot attempts are coming from outside the arc, and he's still shooting 44% on 3-pointers. He's attempting. He leads the league in makes so far. He's attempting over 11 threes per game, and he's still shooting 44%. Now, he's not getting to the rim as much as he was. That's where the shots have he's cannibalized the rim attempts, which therefore means he's getting less free throw attempts. Until recently, he was struggling at the free throw line too. So if he could just continue to kind of, tweak that shot chart, maybe a couple less mid-range attempts, keep shooting a ton of threes because he's suddenly just an amazing 3-point shooter. And I think it's real. By the way, he's better off the dribble than he is catch and shoot, which is crazy. And also he leads the league in unassisted 3-point attempts. But if he could just take one or two of those mid-range jumpers per game and take them at the rim, I mean, we're talking an easy, 30 points per game. He's already at 28. He's not far off. Like the offensive game continues to grow for him, and he's still only 23 years old. So him, becoming I think I saw somebody describe it as the Steph Curry of Michael Jordan's, if you will. It was not something I don't think anyone was expecting this year, but here we are.
I know there are a bunch of old heads out there that are so angry that like analytics has ruined another pure hooper, where like the guy like Ball Don't Stop on Twitter is just like, I hate that Anthony Edwards is taking all these threes, like get me back to my inefficient mid-range, the love of the game, all that stuff.
He's still so good at that too when he needs it, right? It's just, he hasn't gone full James Harden though, right? Like he hasn't quite gone full James Harden.
Not fully Morey Ball brainwashed quite just yet. Like I will never forgive Morey and Mike D'Antoni for brainwashing James Harden so badly to the point that he just was allergic, would refuse to ever take mid-range shots.
And don't forget, Chris Finch was, of course, that Rio Grande, the head coach under Morey, that he was part of that kind of test tube experiment. So that's his part of his background, at least.
Oh, man. All right. Well, look, coming up, Ben is going to grill me on all things Houston Rockets. Is the Rockets' success this season legitimate? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. Look, quick PSA, for anyone who rents, if you haven't heard of Built, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use toward flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. It's really that simple. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 different airlines and 700,000 different hotels and properties around the world that you can redeem your Built points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment and unique experiences that only Built members can access. Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use our URL so that they know that we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba to start earning points on your rent payments today. Now, today's episode is also brought to you by Robinhood. Look, with Robinhood Gold, You don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And continuing on here at our Locked On crossover edition episode, that's Ben Beecken, host of Locked On Wolves. I'm Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets. And Ben, what are you curious about the Houston Rockets? It's your turn to grill me a little bit. What you got for me?
Yeah, so the Rockets, I went back and looked. I had in my head the Wolves lost at least one game against Houston. They won all 3 games last season against the Rockets, including like right after Houston went on that crazy run. I don't remember how many they won in a row, but like last March or whatever.
It was Jalen Green's Linsanity run is what it was.
Okay, gotcha. Like I think they won like right after that. They won all those games in a row. The Wolves beat them as part of a rough patch through the end of the season for Houston, but they still end up winning 41 games. And everyone kind of sees them as this team on the rise. Obviously, the Sengun injury kind of threw a wrench in things late last season. But what would you say from last year to this year? Obviously, right now sitting in the top 5 or 6 in the West. And what's the Rockets like 12-8 or something, or 12-6?
12-6 currently. 12-6.
So what has changed the most? Obviously, there's been a couple of personnel changes, but what would you say from the end of last season to sitting here right now, 18 games in at 12-6? What is the biggest difference between last year's Rockets and this year's Rockets?
So I'm going to go ahead and the number one biggest difference between last year's team and this year's team is a healthy Tari Eason. It's really that simple. Tari Eason is such a distinct difference maker for this ball club. Losing him last year really sucked. He only played about a quarter of the season. He had this weird leg injury thing that required surgery. Was out for the rest of the year, and he'd been an Iron Man up to that point. Played every game at LSU, played every game his rookie season. He was, super healthy, and he's been super healthy, knock on wood, so far this year. He's just a guy, and it's so hard to describe what Tari does other than just say he just makes things happen when he's on the floor. He gets these ridiculous steals where he just manhandles an opposing player, where you'll be watching a very casual inbounds play, and then Tari just grabs the ball away from these grown men. These are grown NBA players, the best of the best, the top 0.001% of basketball players in the world. And Tari Eason makes it look like he's a dad out there playing with a Nerf ball in the driveway with his kid. So just he bullies guys. He forces these incredible steals. He gets these great defensive stops, great, weak side help rotations, all these kinds of things that he provides. And he's also gotten a ton better individually as a player just when it comes to things like finishing around the rim, which he really struggled with his rookie season. So really the number one answer is Tari Eason. Having him available and playing, as many minutes as he is, as a key part of this Rockets rotation. He's closed out certain games. He'll close out certain halves of games if he's playing better than any one of the Rockets 5 starters situationally. Ime Udoka likes to kind of treat things as a meritocracy, where if you're one of the best 5 players that night, you're more than likely going to close a game, or you're more than likely going to play 30 plus minutes in a given game if you're one of the reasons for success in that specific outing. So Tari being healthy and available is probably the biggest part of the recipe, but then some of it is, Amin Thompson has gotten a little bit more comfortable. He looks better, and so those two guys have been dubbed the Terror Twins off the Houston Rockets bench, just completely terrorizing and demoralizing opposing teams with their defense. And then Alperen Sengun being, losing him last season for the final quarter stretch of the season really sucked. He's clearly the Rockets' best player. He's their most consistent player. He's their go-to guy offensively. All the offensive actions involve him in some capacity, either as a screener, as the kind of offensive hub with the ball in his hands, or just getting him, facing up and attacking in space from the perimeter or on the low block. Everything runs through LP, and the Rockets' offense looks all that much better for it. But it's also Sengun's improved defense is the biggest part. I mean, this Rockets team flirted with being a top 5, top 3 defense for a chunk of the season last year. But, and I don't want to say it was in spite of Alperen Sengun, but he wasn't nearly as good last year defensively as he is this year. He has improved to the point where I believe this number still holds as we're recording this on a Monday evening ahead of the Rockets-Wolves matchup. He's the third best big man in the NBA when it comes to rim defending shots at the rim. The only two guys ahead of him are Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren. That's pretty good company to be in for a guy that you look at and you don't consider to be a defensive piece, or even some people have the misconception that he's actually a defensive liability. He's not. And Ime has done some fantastic things scheme-wise to be able to put Sengun in positions to be successful, to take him away from coverages that maybe don't favor him and allow him to do things like playing off-ball, guarding a wing on the perimeter, as opposed to being involved in all these, big man pick-and-roll actions, or doing things like pre-switching so that he can stay out of the actions initially to begin with. So those are, I guess, a few of the reasons why the Rockets have had a lot more success this season in particular.
Yeah, I hadn't realized this until I dug in a bit more on the Rockets so far this year, but Tari Eason, who you talked about for a little bit, actually leads the league in steal rate. And to your point, like just
off the bench, he leads the league in steal rate.
Yeah, just how aggressive he is, and just the level of activity, right? And I was actually, my next question for you was going to be about Sengun, because all the advanced metrics suggest again, we're 18 games in, so small sample size applies, obviously, but that he's having just like as good as he was last year, even if the per game numbers, like scoring wise, are down a little bit, all the metrics suggest he's having an all-star type season. But you already kind of, I was going to ask you what he's changed, most this season, but it sounds like it's the defense. Anything offensively different about Sengun's game so far this year?
Honestly, he got off the year to a rough start. Like, he was actually pretty bad through the first 4 or 5 games, and it was so uncharacteristically off from what we'd become accustomed to seeing from him. It was oh God, did he get his contract and suddenly just regress, and now this is going to look like a terrible deal on paper? It's always that little bit of a worry, when the ink's already dry and a player starts off the season in a bad way, you're kind of oh crap. No, but look, he had a few bad games out of the gate. He missed so many different bunnies and little hook shots, all his usual plethora of shots that he hits with relative ease in and around the basket, and he just was not converting on them. And then he kind of settled in a little bit, and he realized things got back to normal, right? And so now he's back to where he should be. Offensively, though, more or less just the same. I mean, it's still just what he does. The biggest thing for him this year, and he talked about this a lot in the offseason, was he added kind of this James Harden, Joel Embiid-esque rip-through move that he uses, where when he attacks in space, so opposing big guarding, and he's at free throw line or top of the key, whatever, when he decides to turn and attack off the dribble, he'll very intentionally, it's kind of awkward because he's not the fastest looking dude out there, so it looks a little slow-mo-esque, whatever, but he'll do this rip through move, and he's he's got the ball cradled out in front of him. He's yeah, slap at it, hit my arms, and he'll power up through the contact and get some and ones or just draw some free throws that way. So for a guy that already had an insane free throw rate, was able to get to the line pretty consistently through his first few years in the season, especially his early 2 seasons coming off the bench, those things, adding that to his repertoire just kind of helped diversify his offense even further, to where when he doesn't have it going, when he's struggling, whatever, he can get to the free throw line almost at will using that move or any of the other variety of his spin moves and fakes and all the crafty stuff that he can get to on the low block.
I know in Summer League, Timberwolves fans got to see Reed Sheppard take on Rob Dillingham and the Wolves. Is his role right now is just kind of he's the 8th or 9th guy, right? Kind of a fringe rotation, not being asked to do too much at this stage as a rookie with a team that clearly has playoff aspirations. Yeah,
it's kind of tough because the Rockets are very clearly straddling the fence between wanting to make sure that he gets developmental runway and gets rotation minutes, and he's done some good things in those minutes. It's not like they're just complete charity work where they're yeah, okay, take your 10 minutes a night and then we'll survive the bumps that come with it. No, he's been good in some of those minutes, but and I've said this a few times over at Locked on Rockets, if the Rockets really wanted to prioritize winning above all else, Aaron Holiday would be getting those minutes over Reed Sheppard right now. He is very much a rookie, and he has rookie moments, right? He's either sometimes just not aggressive enough, or there have been certain teams, a few games ago against the Pacers were really picking on him defensively through a stretch of the game where Ime just decided to not run him in the second half because he couldn't go back to him because the Pacers were really taking advantage of that matchup. So, I'm of the belief that at this point, it might be more beneficial for Reed Sheppard to be sent down to the G League and get, 30 plus minutes a night running the offense for the G League and really getting those touches, getting that feel and really kind of trying to adjust his play style, because he's got this very unselfish, like pass first mentality about him, but his number one skill is his shooting. And for a team that shoots as poorly as the Rockets do, they really need him to be aggressive shooting the ball when he's in the game and on the court. And he just hasn't really been able to do that yet. It's less about like the shot not necessarily translating and more just the fact that he's very passive at times on the floor. Like he'll pass up like wide open opportunities, and you'll see moments where like the entire Rockets bench and coaching staff, they're like yelling at him like, shoot the ball. And he just won't do it yet, because I think he's still a little worried about not making the right decision, overthinking things, sometimes wanting to make the right play, but he needs to realize the right play is just shoot the damn ball.
All right, last one for you. So obviously Rockets 12-6, great start to the season. I as a Timberwolves fan looking at the standings and just kind of thinking like, telling myself point differential is super important right now through this many games. The Wolves have a positive point differential despite being 8-8. The Rockets have a great point differential. I think it's the third best one in the Western Conference. Based on what you've seen through 18 games, do you feel like the Rockets' success is legitimate? Right now, they're a game back of the Warriors and Thunder, who are tied for first in the West. The teams that we all expected to be at the top of the West, Dallas, Denver, Minnesota, I guess OKC is up there, but Dallas, Denver, and Minnesota are all sixth or worst in the Western Conference. What do you think Houston's staying power is toward the top of the West?
I think they've been able to weather a lot of some of their early deficiencies with the shooting in particular, because they've been so dominant defensively, and then they've also been able to make up the difference, because at the end of the day, you got to be able to put points on the board in the NBA. And the Rockets are still one of the worst shooting teams in the NBA right now, but they've made up the difference there by being a dominant offensive rebounding team, leading the league in that regard, leading the league in second chance points. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're either leading the league or top two in second chance points and offensive rebounding. They've made that part of their identity, where we kind of joke that sometimes the Rockets' best offense is literally just getting the ball up on the board or on the rim and then letting somebody else go get the offensive rebound so they can put it back up for a layup, because they've been so bad on those initial possessions. But it doesn't matter when you get second and third and fourth opportunities to be able to put the ball back up. And they're still a dominant defensive team. They still force a ton of turnovers. They get out and run and transition a little bit. So I think the success is very real, but the ceiling is limited if they can't figure out these shooting woes, because eventually they're going to have games like they did against the Blazers, their most recent loss on Saturday evening, where the Blazers made 18 threes. The Rockets only made 8. The Blazers were plus 30 from the three-point line. And that's happened multiple times this season, where the Rockets have been completely outshot from the three-point line, and yet they've been able to make up the difference elsewhere with those other statistical categories, be it getting to the free throw line, the second chance points, the points off turnovers, but having to rely on 2 or 3 of those categories every single game against some of the better shooting teams in the association, to me, is not sustainable. And so they have to figure out what's going on with their shooting. They need better shooting performances out of Jabari Smith Jr., who is trending upwards as of late. Fred VanVleet, rough start to the season, has been better over these last probably 2 or 3 weeks or so. He's had some monster first and third quarters where he just comes out guns blazing, hitting all his shots. And then the biggest one is Jalen Green. This team will go as far as Jalen Green can take them. And he had a superstar start to the season, an incredible 5 games. And it's been abysmal since then. He's had career lows, or he's posting currently career lows across the board in efficiency. So if he can't get that turned around, then the Rockets are kind of hamstrung in him being one of their key, 8, 9, 10 best rotation guys playing 30 plus minutes a night. If he can't just knock down open shots that are being generated within the flow of the offense, either by gravity from Fred or Sengun or what have you. So that's kind of where the Rockets are at. The success is real, but the ceiling is a little limited if they can't address some of these other concerns.
All right, next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the matchup specifically between the Wolves and Rockets. We'll do that here next. Today's crossover episode of Locked On Rockets and Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Skims. Of course, the most important thing about underwear is that it's comfortable, and certainly gone through periods of time in my life where I didn't make the best selection when it came to underwear and comfort, but thankfully found Skims, and Skims is absolutely the most comfortable underwear you can find out there. Comfort is the most important thing, specifically the stretch 5-inch boxer brief. They actually feel a little bit like you're wearing, they don't feel like you're wearing workout underwear. It's not what you want, but they just are they're more comfortable, right? It's not like if you like wearing boxer briefs, it's better than just a regular boxer fit. It's better than a lot of the boxer briefs you'll find out there. It gives you all the movement you need if you're walking around a lot all day, standing and sitting and whatever. If you are working out, whatever it might be, the 5-inch boxer brief, to me, the stretch 5-inch boxer brief is the best option over at Skims. You can shop Skims men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA. Let them know we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. If you're looking for the perfect gifts for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever. Also available at skims.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that's skims.com/LockedOnNBA.
And final segment here at our Locked On Rockets and Locked On Wolves crossover edition episode. All right, Ben, let's take a look at some of these matchups, some of the expectations that we have for this game. Now, really quickly, going through the injury report here for both teams, I want to clarify. Let's double check here. I had this pulled up, and then I decided to look at the point differentials, so that's your fault. So Mike Conley, day-to-day right now, are we expecting him to play, or is he probably going to...
It sounds like he's truly questionable. He's missed the last 2 games, but now he hasn't played since last Sunday, so he's got 9 days off. The reporting out of practice on Monday was he truly was questionable, but that it felt like something that might need a couple more days. So I would say it's probably a little less than 50-50 that Conley plays.
Okay, right now on the Rockets injury report, Steven Adams, who's been playing like 1 every 3 games, it's been such a weird situation with him. He's currently listed as out for kind of the knee maintenance issue that he's been dealing with. And then Jalen Green's listed as questionable with an illness, which is kind of weird because he was also listed as questionable with an illness at one point last week for one of the Rockets games, and then wound up playing and I guess, played through it, quote unquote. So we'll see what's happening there. Jalen Green may or may not play. We'll find out more closer to tip-off. What's the matchup that you're most intrigued by in this game, Ben?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm curious to see how the Wolves defend Houston on the perimeter. I think that there's a lot of options for Minnesota in terms of perimeter defenders, but I always think it's fascinating depending on the matchup. Like in theory, you'd have Anthony Edwards guard the smaller, quicker player like a Jalen Green, and you would have Jaden McDaniels guard a bigger player. But the Wolves don't always choose to do it that way. And so I'm curious to see what that perimeter, point of attack defense looks like. Now, if Mike Conley doesn't play, then that means either Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Dante DiVincenzo will start. And Conley's missed 3 games so far. Alexander-Walker started 2. DiVincenzo started 1. Alexander-Walker is a superior on-ball defender, but they're both solid team defenders. So that could also kind of adjust. Like I could see Alexander-Walker guarding Jalen Green. Like that could be his primary matchup. So I'm curious to see how Finch kind of doles out those duties.
Yeah, I'm on the Rocket side of things. I would say, like, here's the thing is so much of the Rockets' success this season has been in the 2-man game between Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun. So if you can kind of neutralize those 2 guys in particular, the conventional wisdom might point you to say, okay, yeah, put your best defender, put your best perimeter defender on Jalen Green. But because he's been underperforming so much as of late, you might not even have to do that. If you're the Wolves, you might just be comfortable throwing, honestly, whoever on Jalen Green, and you put your best perimeter defender. So put Jaden McDaniels if you really want to use the length, which we've seen it at times in the past. Lengthy defenders, taller defenders really start to bother Fred VanVleet. It's difficult for him to get separation. It messes with him on his drives, all that stuff. He doesn't have the same benefit of navigating a screen and getting to a quick pull-up if you've got a lengthy defender trailing him. So I could very easily see a world where Chris Finch decides he wants to just blow up that main 2-man action between Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun. Now, flip side of that is, I mentioned it earlier, but Ime's done some really kind of, I guess, unconventional things with Alperen Sengun defensively this season in order to put him in spots to be successful. I think there's a world where, and this depends on how real, I guess, the shooting struggles are for Jaden McDaniels so far this season. There's a world where Sengun might guard Jaden McDaniels to start the game.
Yeah, I could 100% see that. Now, McDaniels did, I think his best 2 shooting games of the year were the last 2 games. I think he had 2 threes against Boston and 2 threes the game before that. But that said, we're still seeing teams, like rightfully so, challenge him to beat them, right? Like he's the worst shooter on the floor that's not named Rudy Gobert. So, whether or not Mike Conley plays, he's always going to be the Wolves' worst shooter on the floor besides Rudy Gobert. So I could definitely see that. We've certainly seen teams do that before. The number one thing I would be nervous about overall is offensive rebounding. You mentioned it earlier when you were talking about the Rockets and their success on offense and what's been successful for them this season. I think they're second in offensive rebound rate, and the Wolves defensive rebound rate, they're middle of the pack, but they have these games. They'll just throw up some real clunkers where nobody rebounds their position, and it's just Rudy and maybe a little bit of Ant or Randall, but like they rarely get everybody rebounding their position in the way they need to. And it might help that Houston doesn't shoot a ton of threes because like the long rebounds, the intermediate rebounds are the ones that really kill them. I think it's something they've shored up a little bit here recently, but we've seen them lose to bad teams. Not saying Houston's a bad team, but lose to bad teams because of the offensive rebounding of those opponents, that the Wolves just, they don't box out. They don't have guards crashing to, or at least getting to the, free throw line extended to grab those intermediate rebounds, and they just get killed on the offensive glass. So that would make me nervous overall in this matchup for Minnesota. That would be kind of if I were setting up keys to the game for Minnesota, it would be the defensive glass would be like top of the list.
Yeah, on the other side, I mean, looking at this thing, first off, shout out to the Blazers, one of those bad teams I know you're alluding to, because they are right up there at the top of the league in offensive rebounding rate and everything. They gave the Rockets a taste of their own medicine in that game, in that loss, where it was just like, oh man, this is what it feels like when a team out rebounds you on the offensive glass and outscores you in second chance points. This sucks, and this is what the Rockets do to teams every single night. So on the other side, looking at Anthony Edwards, man, he's been playing out of his mind. He's shooting a career bet, leading the league. All the numbers that you shared earlier, right, from him from long distance. To me, that is what I'm most scared about, and rightfully so. You should be terrified going up against Ant any game you play against him. But the Rockets are going to put Dillon Brooks on Ant. However, they also switch a lot of actions. They love to switch 1 through 4. They have a confidence in guys like Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. to switch on to other premier perimeter players and hold their own. But that also kind of bites them in the butt sometimes, where that trust, that confidence in those guys, it can work out. But then there's other times where it's like, no, you really want your number one defensive piece on the opposing team's best player as often as possible. There's pros and cons to it, though, right? You can kind of flatten out an opposing offense, right? You take them out of any screening actions. You blow up any of their sets by switching those actions on the perimeter. But then you're basically setting up Ant to have a field day on whoever he wants to go one-on-one with, right? Whether that's Jabari, whether that's Fred VanVleet, whether that's Jalen Green. Now, some of these guys, they can hold their own. Jalen is a much improved defender despite some of the offensive struggles this season and the inconsistency. But I just don't like the Rockets' odds of like letting Ant basically have a field day, choosing whoever he wants to go against. Now that gets a little bit easier when you get to the Terror Twins and you get to sub in Tari Eason and Amin Thompson. And I guarantee you at some point in this game, we will see a 3-man wing lineup of Dillon Brooks, Tari Eason, and Amin Thompson, where Anthony Edwards is looking up and down the lineup and saying, damn, I don't want to go up against any of these guys. But that's not going to be for the entire game is the problem.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I mean, has Houston put 2 on the ball at any point against other like high usage all-star caliber guards? Because that's what, I mean, we obviously saw teams do that in the playoffs last year against Ant, and eventually it wore him down. He had a couple games where he made all the right choices, and like the timing of his passing the ball when they were, like he started to figure out like, hey, if I get off the ball, if I pass it, it's going to come back to me, and now I won't have 2 guys on me anymore, and I can attack or I can shoot a 3. There's been a couple teams this year that have done a great job putting 2 on the ball, forcing it out of his hands. And to the Jaden McDaniels point earlier, and not having Karl-Anthony Towns, like Julius Randle shot the 3 well this year, but he's not Karl-Anthony Towns from deep. There's just less threats on the floor if you put 2 on the ball with Anthony Edwards, and if nobody else, and Randle, that is something Randle can do, is attack a mismatch. If you're doubling Ant, you're not going to double Randle, and Randle can beat almost anybody one-on-one and kind of bully them into a 12, 14 footer, which is probably a better shot than whatever's going to happen with Ant if you're the defense. But Randle, in theory, that's when he's going to be at his best, is going downhill against a rotating defense. So do you think there's a possibility Houston puts 2 in the ball at any point, or do you think they're just going to try and switch through everything and use their length to muddy things up?
I think I could see it a little bit. The problem, and this is, as great as Ime has been as a coach for the Rockets, I do think there's moments where he gets a little bit too stuck in his game plan at times, and maybe, I don't want to say doubles down, but just doesn't adjust quickly enough in a given game. So so if Ant gets off to a quick, boom, huge first quarter or whatever, it might take him until, the third quarter or, looking at film at halftime to then come back and say, okay, now we're going to start putting two on the ball. We're going to force the ball out of Ant's hands. There was a game earlier this season where the Rockets did that like a little bit to Kyrie Irving in their win on the road against the Dallas Mavericks. They basically forced, but it's because they let Kyrie cook because they forced the ball out of Luka's hands, and then eventually Kyrie was cooking all night, so then they had to adjust, and they were like, okay, let's force the ball out of Kyrie's hands, and then Luka had a big fourth quarter. That's just kind of a pick your poison situation with the Mavericks, though. It's not something that they've like over relied on. Ime does have a lot of confidence in most of his guys one-on-one to be able to hold their own even against premier threats like an Anthony Edwards. The biggest thing for the Rockets here is they're still going to be a poor shooting team. They're more than likely not going to have a better night from 3-point land than the Wolves are. Apologies. It's about, can you keep that discrepancy at a manageable distance, right? Like if the Wolves hit 15 threes and the Rockets hit 9 or 10, that's not an insurmountable deficit. But if the Wolves hit 20 threes and the Rockets are still sitting in the single digits, then they're going to be hard pressed to win this game or any game like that, like I already alluded to against their most recent loss against the Blazers.
Yeah, and the Wolves, I mean, you alluded to this as well, like that the Wolves are a high volume 3-point shooting team. They're actually down a little bit in terms of, well, no, they're still top 5 in 3-point attempt rate as a team, and they're they're down to 8th in terms of percentage. Last year they were actually first in the league in 3-point percentage. If you look at cleaning the glass, filtering out end of quarter heaves and garbage time, they were first in the league in 3-point percentage. And no Karl-Anthony Towns, that changes a little bit, but now Ant is shooting like he's Karl-Anthony Towns. You've got some other guys that are shooting the ball pretty well too. So, yeah, I mean, the Wolves are going to get up their 3-pointers. They lost to the Celtics by 2 on Sunday, and Boston, I think tonight set like a record for threes in the first quarter or something. Like they got up more threes and made more threes than the Wolves on Sunday. Wolves ended up losing by 2. So, we talked a little bit about Morey ball earlier. Like that's still kind of a thing. Like whoever's attempting the most threes, they've got a pretty good shot at winning. And the Wolves are usually on the right side of that math equation this year. It's just, can the defense be consistent enough for them to win? But I think they'll be all right offensively.
One thing I will say is this Houston Rockets team to this point this season, they're 12-6. They're sitting at third, fourth-ish in the Western Conference, wherever it is standings wise. They're right up there in the top 5 in the Western Conference. And they haven't lost back-to-back games all season to this point. So that does not bode well for the Wolves, unfortunately, here for all the Locked On Wolves listeners. The Rockets, they look flat out, they got embarrassed in that game against the Blazers. They dominated them Friday in the Cup game. We talked about the records earlier. So Wolves 1-1 with a slightly negative point differential. What was it again, Ben?
I think they're -7.
Okay, so we'll go with -7. So 1-1, -7 in this West Group A division. Rockets 2-0, and they have a whopping +49 point differential. So their chances of getting to the knockout round are looking pretty good. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they can clinch the outright win here with West Group A if they beat the Wolves in this game, because then they'll have the tiebreakers across the board for anybody else that could have gotten to 3-1 or whatever it is. It should be a fun, exciting game, though. I'm looking forward to it. I need to see the Rockets hurry up and get back on track after, get the nasty taste out of my mouth against that loss against the Portland Trailblazers. But we appreciate you guys for tuning into this crossover edition with Locked On Wolves, Ben Beecken. I'm Locked On Rockets host, Jackson Gatlin. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our new daily newsletters. There's a daily newsletter for the Wolves. There's a daily newsletter for the Rockets. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, on YouTube, all those great places. But until then, we'll catch you guys next time.